He once made all of America weep when Luke Spencer married Laura in what became television's most watched wedding. 30 million viewers tuned in to witness a love story that began with violence, transformed by an actor who refused to play it safe. But few know that behind that iconic performance, Anthony Geary was slowly disappearing, crushed under the weight of a character he begged them to kill, struggling with depression so profound he considered ending everything just to escape the role that made him famous. At 78, Anthony Geary lives in quiet exile in Amsterdam, far from the cameras that once captured his every expression. For 4 decades, he was Luke Spencer to millions of fans, but to himself, he became a prisoner of his own success. This is the story of a man who gave everything to television, only to discover that fame doesn't heal. It just makes the pain more public. Anthony Geary was born in 1947 in Colville, Utah, a town so small you could drive through it without realizing you'd arrived. The Geary family were devout Mormons, raised in a world of strict moral codes where humility mattered more than recognition, and discretion was a virtue. His father, Russell, built a construction business with nothing but calloused hands and an unwavering work ethic, coming home each day with sweat still clinging to his brow. His mother, Dana, was the emotional heart of the family, the first to teach young Anthony the art of truly seeing people, a skill that would later become his secret weapon as an actor. Even as a child, Geary watched movies differently. He took notes, writing down directors' names and his own reflections, drawn not to the heroes but to the villains, the complicated souls that other actors were afraid to touch. In a family where no one worked in the arts, Geary somehow knew he wasn't meant for ordinary work. He would recreate entire movie scenes alone in his room, living inside characters as if that were the only way to make sense of the world around him. At North Summit High School, whenever there was a play, everyone simply assumed he'd get the lead. Then came the Golden Ticket, a drama scholarship from the University of Utah. For a boy from Colville, it wasn't just an opportunity to study, it was a declaration that he had chosen the difficult path, not the safe one, but the one that felt true to who he really was. Anthony Geary didn't begin his career under television lights or in Hollywood films. He started where every serious actor must, on the stage, where there are no second chances, no editors to save you, just one moment in the spotlight and an audience that will remember if you fail. At the University of Utah, he earned the prestigious Presidential Award Scholarship for Drama, extraordinary recognition for someone from such a small town. But the real turning point came in the late 1960s when Oscar-winning veteran Jack Albertson arrived to perform in The Subject Was Roses. Geary was cast as the son. After the final curtain, Albertson didn't just applaud politely. He walked backstage and said simply, "Do you want to come on tour with me?" It wasn't small talk. It was a real opportunity, a chance to leave everything familiar behind. Geary didn't hesitate. He got in the car with Albertson, left Utah in his rearview mirror, and never looked back. That tour brought him to Los Angeles, a city that doesn't welcome newcomers easily, especially those without connections or conventional Hollywood looks. But Geary chose the harder path, diving straight into live theater. Over those early years, he performed in more than 50 plays, learning to master emotion and hold audiences not with flashy dialogue, but with his eyes alone. Every night on stage was another lesson in the craft that would make him one of television's most powerful character actors. His transition to television came gradually, with small roles in series like Room 2222 and The Streets of San Francisco. Though the parts were minor, Geary never treated them as throwaways. He brought depth to every character, often making them more memorable than the leads. In 1971, everything changed with a single role on All in the Family. Playing Roger, a man that Archie Bunker suspected of being gay. At a time when LGBTQ+ topics were completely taboo on American television, Geary didn't flinch. He didn't play Roger as a joke or a symbol. He chose honesty, portraying a regular human being without cliches or grandstanding. That performance became one of the earliest moments a gay character was portrayed on TV with genuine humanity. And quietly, Anthony Geary had become a pioneer who helped make such representation possible. When Anthony Geary joined General Hospital in 1978, the original contract was for just 13 weeks. Luke Spencer was meant to be a minor supporting character who would disappear after a few episodes. Instead, he exploded into a cultural phenomenon unlike anything daytime television had ever witnessed. But this wasn't your typical soap opera success story. It was built on controversy and moral complexity that made audiences deeply uncomfortable. Luke Spencer arrived as a complete disruption to the soap opera formula. Where other shows featured suave, flawless leading men, Luke came with a murky past, an unstable temperament, and from the very beginning, he was defined by violence. Luke committed a brutal act of sexual violence against Laura Weber, one of the show's most beloved female characters. By every logical standard, that should have ended his story. Instead, audiences found themselves drawn to him, confused, angry, but unable to look away. The reason Luke Spencer survived his own darkness was Anthony Geary. Geary didn't just act the role, he inhabited it completely, bringing invisible scars and a haunted quality that the script never explicitly called for. Luke wasn't forgiven by the audience, but somehow he was understood. And that understanding came from the emotional depth Geary poured into every single scene. Geary's performance was so compelling that it forced the writers to completely rethink the character. Luke began as a villain, but evolved into something television had never seen before. Not a hero, not a monster, but a man genuinely capable of change. That transformation didn't just affect General Hospital, it changed American television forever. Luke Spencer became the blueprint for every complex male character that followed, paving the way for figures like Tony Soprano and Don Draper. Critics would later call Luke the first anti-hero of American television, and Geary the man who redefined what a leading man could be. When Luke and Laura's Wedding aired in 1981, 30 million Americans tuned in, more viewers than had watched that year's Academy Awards. It wasn't just a soap opera storyline, it had become a cultural event. But for Anthony Geary, this massive success came with a price that would haunt him for decades. Success, Anthony Geary would learn, could be its own form of prison. His 8 Daytime Emmy Awards for playing Luke Spencer set an unprecedented record that still stands today, a testament to his extraordinary talent and the industry's recognition of his work. But with each award, each accolade, the walls of his golden cage grew higher. Every time Geary tried to step outside of General Hospital, whether in television or film, people still saw Luke. His extensive theater work, his appearances in dozens of other productions, even his dramatic range, none of it mattered to a public that had decided who he was. Any role that wasn't Luke Spencer seemed to fade into obscurity before it even began. The character that had made him famous had also made him invisible as anyone else. Geary once said bluntly, "I don't want to be Luke forever." But whenever he returned to the screen, that was still the only role anyone expected from him. For most actors, a single iconic character would be the dream of a lifetime. For Geary, it became a closed loop. The place where he found his greatest success was also where he remained most confined. He publicly rejected the role multiple times over the years, even pleading with producers to kill off the character. But the audience wouldn't allow it, the network wouldn't allow it, and Hollywood certainly wouldn't allow it. Behind those intelligent eyes and deeply nuanced performances, that had captivated America for decades lay a truth that few understood. Anthony Geary was slowly disappearing, consumed by a character he could never escape. The more successful Luke Spencer became, the more Anthony Geary, the real man, retreated from the world. For more than 40 years on television, Anthony Geary was one of the most recognizable faces in America, yet somehow remained one of its most private citizens. While his co-stars attended award shows with their families and lived openly in the spotlight, Geary was practically invisible. He never appeared at major Hollywood events, never flaunted relationships, never had a single romantic scandal make it into the press. For decades, no one knew who he was dating, where he truly lived, or whether he had ever loved anyone at all. The less the public knew about his personal life, the more curious they became. Some believed he was painfully shy. Others thought he had loved someone and lost them, and many speculated about his sexuality. But it was all just whispers and rumors, until February 2025, when a single Instagram post shattered 4 decades of carefully maintained silence. Claudio Gama, a man living in Amsterdam, posted a photo from what appeared to be a simple pizza party. The caption was straightforward, but earth-shattering. "Tony and I met 30 years ago this February and got married 6 years ago, also in February. 2 anniversaries to celebrate." Just like that, the truth emerged. Anthony Geary had been quietly living with his same-sex partner for 3 decades and had been married since 2019, and somehow, nobody knew. No media coverage, no public confirmation, no lavish celebrity wedding. Nothing. Claudio's posts revealed glimpses of the life Geary had chosen. A modest home in Amsterdam, intimate dinners with friends, good wine, and a cat named Max. No scripts, no cameras, no performances. Just 2 people living authentically together. What shocked fans wasn't just the revelation about Geary's sexuality, but the fact that he had managed to keep such a significant relationship private throughout his entire career. Looking back, everything made sense. Why he avoided media attention, why he never brought guests to premieres, why he eventually moved to Amsterdam, a place far more accepting and free from the scrutiny of Hollywood. The relationship had lasted quietly for 30 years, requiring no public validation to remain extraordinary. For a man who had spent his career being someone else, he had finally found a place where he could simply be himself. Even as Anthony Geary found personal happiness, his relationships within the industry remained complicated, particularly with Jeannie Francis, the actress who played Laura. For decades, audiences assumed they were as close off-screen as they appeared on screen, but the reality was far different. Geary was never one to share emotions easily, avoided social interactions, and rarely allowed anyone into his private world. Francis, by contrast, was more open and emotionally expressive, and those fundamental differences often left them completely out of sync. They had silent disagreements about how to portray their characters, especially during the controversial early phases of Luke and Laura's relationship, when the script required them to depict a romance that began with violence. Geary, always prioritizing the artistic integrity of a role, would openly criticize producers and writers. But his cold, rational approach often left Francis feeling isolated, particularly as she bore the emotional weight of connecting with a generation of young female viewers who saw Laura as their representative on screen. For years, they barely spoke outside of their required scenes together. For Geary, who feared emotional entanglements and the personal expectations that extended beyond professional work, that distance may have been a deliberate choice for survival. He didn't attend cast parties or join colleagues for meals after shooting. The moment the cameras stopped rolling, Anthony Geary would slip quietly into the shadows while Luke Spencer remained on the soundstage. Only years later, after both had left General Hospital and were free from the pressures of maintaining their iconic images, did Geary and Francis begin to slowly reconcile. Francis would later reflect, "We learned how to forgive each other." It wasn't a warm embrace between lifelong friends, but rather a quiet acknowledgement between two artists who had once created television history together, then moved past each other like inhabitants of completely different worlds. For Anthony Geary, silence was never about lacking feelings. It was about surviving in an industry that never stopped talking. Sometimes, his version of friendship didn't come through long conversations, but through a single knowing glance shared after years of distance. Anthony Geary left General Hospital the same way he had lived his entire career, without fanfare. No farewell press conference, no tearful final day on set, no glamorous send-off befitting a legend. He simply vanished, just as he had always existed in the entertainment world, humble, weary, and discreet. But behind that characteristic silence lay a painful truth he wouldn't reveal until much later. His body had simply given out. During his final years on the show, Geary suffered a serious back injury that gradually robbed him of basic mobility. Standing for hours on set, constant movement, and performing action scenes that had to be repeated dozens of times each day had taken a devastating toll. He was forced to undergo surgery, endure months of physical therapy, and face stretches when he could barely get out of bed. For an actor who had lived entirely through his roles, it was the cruelest possible blow, not because he could no longer perform, but because his own body had betrayed the passion that had defined his entire life. Geary later admitted, "I didn't leave Luke because I was bored. I left Luke because I was exhausted, physically and emotionally." He refused to let audiences see a tired, aging Luke Spencer limping through scenes. After thousands of episodes that had been etched so deeply into viewers' memories, he couldn't bear to leave behind a worn-out version of the character that had meant so much to so many people. And so he left in silence, not because his time had passed, but because his strength had been completely spent. Today, Anthony Geary lives in Amsterdam in a modest home that bears no resemblance to a Hollywood mansion. There are no reality TV cameras, no social media presence, no attempts to maintain public relevance. Just Claudio Gama, his partner of 30 years, Max the cat, and a small circle of friends who visit occasionally. Instead of making public appearances or chasing new roles, Geary spends his days reading literature, particularly Shakespeare, the same playwright whose works he had mastered on stage long before television fame found him. He reads voraciously, writes scripts that no one will ever see, cooks meals with his partner, and lives at a pace entirely of his own choosing. It's a deliberate existence, perfectly suited to the fiercely independent nature and intensely private lifestyle he had maintained even during his most public years. Geary no longer wants to act, not because there are no opportunities, but because he no longer needs the spotlight that had once both elevated and imprisoned him. For a man who had spent decades being Luke Spencer to millions of viewers, he had finally found something more valuable than fame: the freedom to be simply Anthony Geary. In a culture obsessed with celebrity and constant visibility, his choice to step away completely might seem like defeat. But perhaps it represents the highest form of personal triumph: the courage to define success entirely on his own terms. At 78, Anthony Geary has chosen silence over spectacle, authenticity over image, and peace over recognition. The tragedy isn't that he disappeared from television. The tragedy is how long it took for him to discover that the life he truly wanted was the one he had been living quietly all along, hidden behind the character that made him famous, but nearly destroyed the man beneath it. In the end, Anthony Geary didn't just play television's first anti-hero, he lived as one, complex and contradictory, damaged but ultimately redemptive. And maybe that's the most honest performance he ever gave. Only 0.4% of people watching are subscribed. You've stayed this long, let's fix that.